Hey everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm going to let me share my screen here real quick. Um, and I'm going to go through a session that is, for anybody who knows me and knows stuff that I've put out, maybe no surprise, but is a session called the Content Catalyst. And we're going to talk about the role of content in a HubSpot business, and specifically how to use your expertise as a way to generate content. Think about combining what you're doing when you're working in HubSpot, whether you're working with clients, whether you're working in-house and want to sort of open up the possibility for opportunities in the ecosystem. But really take your expertise and leverage it, make it a high leverage asset for yourself without taking a ton of time, having to become a content marketer, or otherwise feeling like you need to be on the content flywheel. So if there's questions as we go through this, my breakout after this will be a sort of a much deeper dive on some of the sort of tactical aspects of this, but it's gonna be relatively, and I think this is sorry. The first question I sort of want to pose to folks here is, and this maybe will vary a little bit based on specific roles, but like, do you feel like you should be creating more content? Whether that's content that you're sharing publicly, whether that's content that you're sharing internally, with sort of, do you feel like you should be creating more? I think this is a very common sort of, not point of contention, but a question a lot of folks are asking themselves is like, where do I find time to do more? Do I feel like I should be doing more? So I'm curious sort of people's take on where they are today related to creating content. And then secondly, do you have a clear process for creating content? And this, I think, the second part of that first question, content is one of those things that can feel incredibly overwhelming, can be incredibly time consuming depending how you approach it. So curious to hear from everybody here on those two things. Because the common sort of reality when I talk to folks, and I'll give some background on myself in a second, but want to sort of get straight into things here. But the common reality that I hear from folks who are thinking about creating content, thinking about where content fits in their go-to-market motion, thinking about where content can help them grow, whether it's their own business, an agency business, or they're in a marketing or content role in-house. There's typically sort of three things that stand out that either are happening to a degree that in a way that isn't ideal, or just not happening at all. So generally efforts are pretty fragmented, and the strategy behind those efforts is either missing or just unknown in terms of how the content that you're spending time creating will actually help the business grow. Inconsistent publishing, there's some misnomers around this one, but it's very common that I'll see teams will sort of sprint on, we created a whole bunch of stuff and then we stopped because it didn't work, or we think it didn't work, so we went and did something else, and then we sort of go in spurts around creating content. And then finally, and I think the most important one when it comes to creating content that you want to have an impact on a business, is there's generally no feedback loop around content. And this is one that we'll talk a lot about in this session. And this, not everybody, virality is not everything, obviously, but it's a pretty common sentiment, right? Like, we created this piece of content, we published this piece of content, now what? Did anybody buy our product because of it? Did anybody see it? Did anybody engage with it? What actually happened with this thing that we shipped? So some really quick background as we sort of get into things here, like why am I even talking about content? Isn't this kickoff for HubSpot? So I've always been in early stage sort of growth marketing and earlier spanned across a couple of product roles. But so I've been a user of HubSpot for a long time. But I really only went super deep in the HubSpot ecosystem when I joined Arrows in 2021. And Arrows, when I joined, was not exclusively a HubSpot company, and we made the decision, so 6 months into me being there, to exclusively focus on HubSpot. And what that meant was that I got a crash course in everything HubSpot through the lens of being an app partner in the ecosystem, exclusively focused on the ecosystem. So, and also for a use case that there wasn't a ton of content around, there wasn't a ton of people talking about in post-sale customer success. More recently, launched ConnectedGTM, which is step-by-step HubSpot playbooks, and then AccountScout is pretty brand new, but replacement for HubSpot Insights. So all of these things, almost everything that I do now is in the HubSpot ecosystem. And a large part of what I'm doing is creating content either for companies in the HubSpot ecosystem or talking about the HubSpot ecosystem. So the thing that I really want to get into, and I know the session is going to be a little shorter than planned, so I want to get through the sort of framework that I want you to take away from this session. And the reason for talking about content at all is that in the state that we are at today, with talk about AI, talk about everything that's happening, the world is just getting noisier, essentially. Expert-led content and content that is driven by the expertise that you all, as folks in the HubSpot ecosystem, folks who are in HubSpot every day, have, is what will work now sort of more than ever, because the difference between what you can create without expertise, it's never been easier to create content without expertise. It's also never been easier to create content with expertise, but the difference between those two things, the degree to which they stand out, or expert-led content stands out, has sort of never been more obvious. So the framework that I'll walk through, which will hopefully give you some ideas for how you can go back to the sort of original questions, create more content that goes not necessarily more for the sake of more, but content that elevates you, elevates your brand, elevates the company that you work with or for, and helps become an authority on the problems that you want to be known for solving. Is this sort of 5-step system, which starts with identifying problems and ends with testing essentially whether you have solved those problems through your content, or to the degree that you can solve a specific problem through content. So it goes from identifying problems, extracting expertise, drafting fast, editing slow, and then testing. So we're going to go through each of these things step by step, and starting with identifying problems, which is maybe a different approach to creating content or thinking about content than if you were to go write, an SEO optimized blog post, for example, where you might go open a keyword research tool, find a relevant term that has high volume that seems like it might be a good fit for your business, and go create a piece of content about it. The starting point that I would suggest instead is to identify problems from that are already being asked. I have an example here in the HubSpot community, but the very best, if you're running any kind of service business for sure, the very best source of problems is going to be in the conversations that you're having with either existing customers or prospective customers. What are the things that people are already asking when they have a conversation with you? And once you have those problems, you have a starting point. You essentially have a roadmap for content that you can create. And I would suggest starting, like, identifying your top 5 problems that people come to you with, and you can bucket those. They don't have to be the top 5 questions necessarily, but the sort of top 5 related topics. We did this at Arrows when we were starting in the HubSpot ecosystem. We essentially went and found either through customer interviews or from looking in the community, like what are the things that people who are have an interest in Arrows, what are they asking about? Like, what are the things that they, ideally, the things that they are asking about that they've looked really hard, but they can't find an answer to. And for us, that was how to run customer success in HubSpot. But once you have your problems, you need a way to answer those problems, or you need a way to answer those questions that are being asked. And we'll talk about why, and have Fathom here. I'm sure Fathom's in the kickoff, but we'll talk about why call recordings are a great source of this, or why record your expertise in a second. But whether it's you as who is the subject matter expert, or whether you know who is the subject matter expert to answer the questions that you've identified, the next step is just go dump all the answers to those questions by extracting expertise from those people. So ask them the questions directly. Essentially, act like a journalist. Be inquisitive. It came up in the very first session. Be always be learning. Right? Keep asking questions around the specific questions that you've identified of the people who have prior experience in those problems, whether that's you or somebody else. And for a lot of folks here, that will just be you. But I would still do this the same way. Record yourselves asking or answering those questions. The next thing, draft fast. This sounds obvious. I have Claude here. You don't have to do this with AI. You can do this however you like. But the point is, get from raw expertise to a draft. It doesn't have to be good. Just get to a draft that matches the channel or the place that you expect to put this content in terms of format as fast as you possibly can, because drafting will never be the thing that wins. You just sort of want to get that step out of the way. So the way that I do this is so this is the ConnectedGTM newsletter, and I just have a project for this project, I guess. And every time I extract expertise, I get a transcript, I dump it into Claude, and I say, hey, give me and I'll share the prompts in the next session if folks want them. But just dump in the transcript and say, hey, give me a draft, essentially, because we want to get that step out of the way so that we can focus on the real work, which is editing the draft to actually be read and verified as good by humans. Which there are lots of things that you can do and iterate and improve on this step of the process. Like, this is absolutely a skill in itself, and is the one that I think if you have to focus into, or in a limited number of areas in this process, it would be getting better at editing and getting better at asking good questions, because those two things will get your content much further than anything else. And this is how you will ultimately create the sort of final version of a thing that you want to share with the world, whether that's one person, whether that's hundreds of people, whether it's thousands of people, whatever it might be. Editing is going to be the step that gets you there, and I would put at least 90%. I'm going to go with 90%, maybe more depending on the day, of your focus in the hook for your content, whatever format you're writing for the hook, the first line, the first 5 seconds of a video. The first piece is always going to be the most important piece, because you always have to cut through the noise. You always have to give people a reason to keep going, to invest in your content. And then the final step in the process, before you just repeat and go back through the loop, is to test and validate. And this is something that I don't see talked about much, if at all, in content. And honestly, I think is the most important part of or the area with the biggest opportunity for content. And it's also the place where you get to start bridging the gap from I'm publishing to I'm having a conversation, which ultimately, if you want to drive pipeline out of your content, if you want to increase your network out of your content, if you want to learn from post or publishing content, getting to a conversation and getting to conversations with the right people as fast as possible is going to be what's ultimately going to get you there. So this example, a channel like LinkedIn is great for this. You can do this in essentially any two-way channel will let you do this, which is why I prioritize those channels. But whenever you're publishing something, even if you don't start with publishing, you could start with this step. You could start with testing and validating, which would be as soon as you have a starting point, continue to ask questions, continue to get back to the start of the loop and figure out what is the next thing that I can go answer. Matt mentioned this previously, but if you solve one problem, you'll immediately have a new problem. And asking questions and validating that you've actually solved the problem to the depth which is needed will help unearth additional angles for content, additional ways that you can take the thing that you've already created, or an entirely new thread that you can go rabbit hole down. And so the sort of to recap, I guess the framework itself, if you're to go do this in steps, and the idea here is that you should be able to go ship something very quickly with this approach, because you're not there's no sort of there's no requirements beyond answering the questions that are already being asked. So start with documenting your questions. Again, I have client here, but whether that's a client, whether that's an internal stakeholder, whether that's the starting point or the question that you were asked to start a project, could all be great kicking off points for this process. Then go find those questions. This second step is probably optional, honestly, but to go find those questions, find examples of the people who are already asking those questions. If you've got that question from a call or from internally, you already have at least one person who is asking that question. Extract your expertise and create a much better answer than what already exists. There may be no answer, in which case any answer is going to be much better. Find the best performing answers or the pieces of the answer that work best, that resonate the most, that get the most replies, and then go create original content around those answers. Go share those out, and then from there you can go through this sort of first loop a lot, generally, before you even get to this last piece, which is you go find all the adjacent questions, and you end up with this sort of spider web of answers to related questions to get to the point of solving a complete job to be done. So this, to sort of tie this all back to if you're, what you want this to drive business, if you want this to grow pipeline, ultimately by doing this, you're gradually becoming more of an authority on the specific problems, the specific jobs that your ideal customers, ideal clients, internal stakeholders are trying to do. And you essentially have documented your way to a resource that positions you as that authority. So that is the framework. Let's get into questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I guess, and go back to chat. But yeah, I'm really curious to hear how people are approaching content today and sort of how this maps for them.